Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. Good morning to those on the West and the Central time zones. Those following us from Europe and Israel, want to wish you a good evening. We're blessed today to have a guest that we cherish each time he comes on, and that is Ari Sacher. Ari, as many of you know, is one of the executives at RAFAEL. He's really one of the masterminds when it comes to missile defense and when it comes to stopping the projectiles that are coming from Iran and its 8 proxies. Not only is Ari very involved, intimately involved in that world, but when America invests in Israel's defense with Iron Dome, with David Sling, when senators come, when diplomats come, when congressmen and congresswomen come, it's Ari who's the one that takes them around, shares with them, explains everything to them. Ari grew up in Binghamton, New York, in upstate New York, made Aliyah, and he and his wife have a beautiful family. They've raised their children and grandchildren in Israel. And he's really a very special person, a thoughtful person, a thoughtful Jew, and someone that can take very abstract, complicated ideas and articulate them and explain them in a clear way to someone who does not have a degree in physics or a degree in engineering. And Ari, we want to thank you. We know that you've spoken for many of the chapters over the past couple of weeks in the States. Now that you're back in Israel, back at RAFAEL, we want to thank you for addressing us.
It's my pleasure, Steve. Thanks for having me again. Much appreciated. So let me just kick this off a little bit, give you guys a brief overview what's going on here militarily. All has been quiet on the Western Front since January, and on the Northern Front since December, and it's really been quiet on the Iranian front pretty much since mid-October. We never signed a peace treaty with the Iranians. We did indeed sign a peace treaty with a ceasefire, at least, with Hamas and with Hezbollah. So let's start from the furthest away. In October, after the Iranians so rudely attacked us with ballistic missiles that were, to a large extent, taken out by Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 missile defense systems, Israel responded much more forcefully than Israel responded for Iran's attack the night between April the 13th and 14th. We took out, essentially, if you can believe what you read on the internet, 2 different kinds of targets. Target number 1 was their capability to make rocket motors for their ballistic missiles. Or ballistic missiles, if you don't have a rocket motor, then the missile isn't going to go very far. And in order to make a solid rocket motor, essentially the way you make it is by making a cake. You put in all the different ingredients and you put it and you stir it up in a mixer, and then you pour it and you let it harden. It's a special mixer that you need because these are explosives and they're stuff you wouldn't carry around your house. So you need a special mixer that has a liquid seal. Nothing's going to get out. Problem with these mixers is that they're hard to come by, and when you come by them, they're really a lot of money. They come from Russia, they come from Ukraine, US, China, and the idea was to take out Iran's mixers. And you take out their mixers, you prevent them from building any more rocket motors for a very long time, which means whatever number of missiles that they have, that's what they got, and that's what they can use. Oh, by the way, the other thing we did was, again, according to reports, is that we took out the radars from their strategic air defense systems. They have these Russian systems called S-300, and they have quite a large range. 100 miles, even more than that. And the idea is that you have these things up and you can prevent Israeli aircraft, or we'll call it coalition aircraft, from coming in and doing damage. What we essentially did by taking out these radars was we essentially knocked on their doors, went into their house, stole their keys, went back home. Taking out the radars didn't do damage, but if I have the key to your house, you are impotent to do anything for me coming back into your house and taking what you want. Israel has the means, or at least has the capability now, to go into Iran untouched and do what it needs, what it feels that it needs to do in order to protect itself and its citizens. So Iran is waiting to be attacked if we choose to do so, and if we if we get I wouldn't say permission, but we work together with the Americans in order to do this. I don't think that Israel's going to do anything on her lonesome. I think anything that we do is going to be done in concert with the Americans, even if they just say go ahead and don't send even one plane. So that's Iran. Iran, they have problems. They have problems of their own.
Ari, can we ask you a question about Iran? Now, those ballistic missiles that left this, they went into the stratosphere and then returned back into the atmosphere. Apparently, in 15 and a half minutes, they left Iran and landed in Israel. Many of them were taken out. Some of them landed that were not going to destroy strategic places. Our understanding is they have at least 2,000 more of these ballistic missiles. Some of them are stored underground. Can you describe to us, in theory, could there be, if Iran set off large numbers of these ballistic missiles that would overwhelm the system of Arrow 2, of Arrow 3, could that be a disaster, a catastrophe in Israel? And then as well, could you explain to us that the fact that these mixers have been destroyed, the ones that they have in storage, do they have the fuel attached to them? Are they in a position when they can be shot off?
So let me answer the questions one by one. The first question is, if Iran were to launch all of their remaining rockets, missiles, could that do damage? Yes, but we have our missile defense systems, not only Arrow 3, but Arrow 2, and we have David Sling as well that have certain capability against these threats. Do we have the correct, ample war stock of these missiles? I am not at liberty to talk about numbers, but what I can say is that both times that Iran opened fire on Israel, there was sufficient warning, heads up from satellites, from outer space, U.S. satellites, coalition satellites, to know what was going on. Israel will not be surprised. It wasn't surprised last time. The difference is between this time and last time is that when the intel is received that missiles are being moved to launchers are being loaded, launchers are being taken out, then Israel has the capability to do damage of our own before they can launch their missiles. I can assume that a certain number of those bad boys will be taken out before they're launched. And what is fired on Israel, Israel can handle. I'm not saying that there won't be any damage, but I'm saying that what damage there will be, I believe, is damage that can be contained. Regarding the other question of all the rockets now, all the missiles now are fully loaded with solid fuel. That's the difference between solid fuel and liquid fuel. Iran used to use what's called liquid fuel. You'd have to go to a service station, and fill up the missiles with fuel immediately before launch. So the time that we had to prepare for launch was significantly larger. Only about 10 or 15 years ago, Iran moved to solid fuel. Once these things are loaded with solid fuel, you stick them underground. You want to bring them up, then you bring them up and you launch them. Yes, there's time lag, but it's much faster to launch these solid fuel rockets because they're already loaded.
Thank you.
My pleasure. So if that's Iran, then let's look at Iran's major proxy. I'm going to get to Hamas last. Iran's major proxy, the proxy that they, in their strategy pre-October 7th, was the proxy that would essentially do the major damage on Israel, and that is Hezbollah. Hezbollah was doing damage in a number of ways before the ceasefire. What people don't realize is they were sending killer drones, and they were sending cruise missiles, but what they were also doing was they were firing anti-tank weapons. These anti-tank weapons had a range of 5, 6, even 7 miles. They would be on the other side of the border. They would have a clear line of sight into Israel. These are weapons like something called a Cornet missile, which is a Russian laser-guided missile, which means you have to see what you're looking at. You fire the laser, and then that follows where the laser's looking. Really, really simple. If I don't have a line of sight to the target, I can't hit the target. Then they had this other cool missile, which was called Almas, which is Arabic for diamond, and it's called Hebrew for gil, which is spike. Because what we did was we accidentally left one or two of these in Lebanon in the mid 2000s, and the Iranians have essentially gone and reverse engineered it. At least if that's what we read on public media. And this thing does not need a line of sight. This has a television camera on it. You know what you're looking at. You fire off the missile, it goes where it needs to go, and as it gets closer to the target, it locks on the target and it takes out the target. So we were having most of our problems. Most of the people that were killed, that were fired on, including my nephew, on one of the first days of the war. Baruch Hashem, he was injured. He actually went back into the army. I can't understand the soldiers that do that. Tremendous, tremendous people. I could never do that. He was fired on by an anti-tank weapon. Nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. And these were taking out not only soldiers, but these were taking out bases. They were taking out, just picking off houses in Israeli towns like Metula. There's not one house in Metula that hasn't been taken out. Now, it turns out that Israel decided to go into Lebanon. Part of the strategy before we went in, the bombing of the cities, the towns on the border, was not just because we don't like these guys and they were firing guns at us. These were the locations from which they were firing anti-tank weapons. We had to push them away from those locations. We had to push them. They keep on using this term beyond the Litani River. Well, the Litani River it's about, sometimes it's only about this wide, but the point is that beyond the Litani River, the anti-tank weapons cannot reach their target. You can't see your target, and even if you can see it, the Almas can't get there. So we had to push them beyond the Litani River. And lo and behold, if you look at the number of missiles, anti-tank missiles that were fired on Israel since June, July, that number has just been reduced every single month, to the point that later on, November, there were no anti-tank weapons being fired at us because we had well and truly kicked these guys off the border. That's why it is critical that Hezbollah not be allowed to return below the Litani River. If Hezbollah becomes a military presence again in Lebanon, that would be a bad thing. That's something we need to prevent. But something we cannot allow to happen is to allow Hezbollah below the Litani River. At least not with any now, that said, the Lebanese army is doing things that I personally didn't expect them to do. They are imposing force, imposing their will on Hezbollah and kicking them out. Very happy, very surprised, but very happy. Yea, well and truly, we have left 5 separate bases in Lebanon, but otherwise, as of yesterday, we're gone. We don't live there anymore. And we have to make sure that Hezbollah remains above the Litani. That will definitely go a long way into determining how we proceed with this ceasefire. The last ceasefire I want to talk about is with Hamas. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Most Israelis, a large majority of Israelis, are not willing to pay the price that would need to be paid to continue in the second phase of the ceasefire, which essentially returns Hamas to Gaza. It takes Israel out of Gaza, and what it really does is that it moves Israel back to October the 6th. Minus a lot of Chayalim that were killed, minus a lot of people that died on October the 7th. I don't want to use the term, it would mean that we had lost the war, but it certainly would mean that we did not win the war. So more than, I would say 60, close to 70% of Israelis, as a function of a poll I actually looked at yesterday, are dead set against this from across the political spectrum. So I do not know what is going to happen. There is a possibility, I would even say a good possibility, that Hamas will return to war, and we will return to our battle against the Hamas. If that happens, does Hamas have rockets left over to shoot us? They have a much smaller number than Hezbollah has. Hezbollah has a residual number. They started off with a way higher number, 150,000 odd missiles. So Hamas started off with a much lower number. So they now have far fewer. We took out much more of Gaza as percentage-wise than we did in Lebanon. We took out a vast majority of their rockets. Yea, verily, they still have rockets left over. There is nothing that's getting into Gaza We have to prevent the Philadelphia corridor from becoming the same underground highway of smuggling that it was during the war and before the war. If that happens, then we can ensure that nothing gets into Gaza. Their factories have been taken out by the IDF, so their capability to build new weaponry is essentially crushed to zero, such that the residual fire that we would take from Gaza would be very, very limited, and I think that we could address this with the anti-missile systems that we have now, specifically Iron Dome and perhaps David Sling. That's what things look like now here, Steve.
Before we ask you about the Shia militias in Western Iraq, and before we ask you about Syria, if we could go back to Lebanon for a minute. So you shared with us that those anti-tank mortars, the ones that do not have a trajectory, the ones that were killing civilians and killing soldiers and then destroying towns like Metula, they now are out of range at this point, and Israel's very vigilant trying to prevent them from getting back in range. And you also mentioned that, we've seen different numbers. Did the IDF eliminate 75%, 70% of their rockets? Of what's left in Lebanon, from what you can share with us, long range, mid range, and specifically precision guided rockets that you were speaking about, do they have a significant arsenal of long range, mid range, and precision guided missiles? And if they do, if the answer is yes to that question, the David Sling, the Iron Dome that Israel has, is it capable of defending the north against those, or would they overwhelm the system?
It's hard to talk about numbers of missiles because that's not the limiting factor. The number of missiles is extremely low now. It's much less than 50% of what was there before. Again, I'm being nourished, as they say, by news on the internet, which I can look at with my eyes, and I can say that the limiting factor here is not the number of missiles that they have, because in order to launch a missile, you need, guess what? A launcher. And what we were extremely pedantic about and fastidious about was taking out their launchers, which means they can have all the missiles in the world, but if we have reduced their launcher capability to the percentage that we have reduced it to, it's impossible for them to shoot large salvos of missiles. That would be problematic for us to defend against, and that would return Israel to those heady days of September, when I was going in my hometown in and out of bomb shelters a couple of times a week. I don't believe we're going to return there again. Also, their capability to rebuild, to replenish their supplies has essentially zeroed out because of the fall of Syria. Before Syria fell, the Ba'ath regime was working the Assad Ba'ath regime was working hand in hand with the Iranians. There was what's called a land bridge between Iran and Lebanon, meaning you get in your truck, you load the truck with missiles, you drive to the border, you stop a couple of miles before the border to one of these indescript cave-looking things, you go down into the cave, and then there are highways underground from one side of the border to the other. They came out in Lebanon and they continued. They would they would go by sea, drop their weapons off in northern Syria in the Latakia port, and they'd find ways to smuggle them in from there. There is no more land bridge. Syria is no longer a willing friend of Iran. Syria is not letting in. They're preventing. Their army is preventing any kind of weapons going through. Israel is, as you saw yesterday and the day before, is not making any kind of empty threats as to, if we know that there's an Iranian jetliner coming and we believe that it has weapons on it, and apparently we're quite good at figuring that thing out, then we told the Lebanese, if you let that land, we will shoot it down. And it didn't land. It went back to Iran, and Iran and Lebanon have shut down their air traffic between them. Our situation is infinitely better than it was when the ceasefire began, if only because of the fall of Syria. That was something that I don't believe we had anything to do with, but it was auspicious. It was really, really a gift from God, which really allowed us to solidify our positions.
Could we say that maybe the role we played in that is, once they saw that Hezbollah was not going to defend Assad, the Syrian army is not particularly strong. So the Russians weren't defending Assad, and neither were the Iranians through Hezbollah. They could just, in that sense, we're the ones who facilitated the Sunni overthrow of the Alawite Shia.
If they actively facilitated it, or they looked at it and said, that's what's going to happen to us if we don't get out of here. And the scientist that I am, I really point skywards when I look at the fall of Syria. That was something that I don't believe could have been done without a lot of help from God.
In terms of the diminishment, the destruction, the removal of Iranian missiles, rockets, other assets in Syria, can you go in to describe a little of that?
If you look again, if all you have to do is look at the news, and you see pictures of Israel taking out the Syrian weapons on the ground. You see them taking out all their aircraft, except for a couple of aircraft that were left, and the folks in the new regime in Syria had to figure out how to use them via YouTube. And by the way, you can use YouTube to figure out how to fly the things, but you can't use YouTube to import parts to replace the ones that are broken. You cannot do any kind of maintenance on these things. So whatever they have, it's just gonna be, it'll turn to dust in a couple of weeks, months, years. Israel we took advantage of the situation. We took land which was critical for us, specifically the Syrian Hermon, which is now being called in Israel Katif HaHermon, the shoulder of the Hermon. And if you look at the Hermon, what I always thought in the Hermon was our Hermon, and you couldn't see the Syrian Hermon. Nope. What you saw in Israel was the Syrian Hermon, and that little piece below it, that's us. We now have eyes that can take us way beyond Damascus. We have soldiers there that I don't think are going to be coming back to Israel for a long time, and that's okay, because every Friday my wife bakes cookies and we send them up to Syria, to the soldiers there. I believe that what Israel did to Syria, taking advantage of the fact that it fell in such a quick fashion, and there was a vacuum, and the scientific term is Israel abhors the vacuum, and we just got sucked into where it was, did what we needed to do, and changed the situation on the ground. I don't want to say irrevocably, but the situation is vastly changed to what it once was.
Thank you. If you could describe the situation in Western Iraq, what their capabilities are with cruise missiles or swarm drones, etc., and if there are any, and then I guess probably we would like to ask you a little bit about the Houthis.
Okay. Western Iraq, that is, to quote my father, as it's the least of our problems. They have a couple of residual weapons left over. All they were really doing to us was annoying us. They would fire over a drone every week or two, and we would shoot it down most of the time before it even got to Israel. I'm not as much worried about those guys as I am the Houthis. The Houthis are a problem, because if things go south in Gaza, the Houthis have promised to open fire on us again. And again, they're a bit of more of a nuisance than they are a major threat. They fire stuff at us, and we have shot it down. They don't fire at Israel in salvos. Once or twice something has gotten through, and that's just the nature of the beast of missile defense. What the Houthis have done, which I don't think enough people know about, is that the Houthis have essentially laid siege on Israel's southern city of Eilat. Eilat was, until October the 7th, Israel's second most important port. You had Haifa, and you had Eilat. In fact, all of the cars that were coming in from Japan, from Korea, even from China now. I mean, there's a whole bunch of cars coming in from China now you cannot get in the U.S. There's brands I had never heard of, but they're just taking over the market with electrical cars. These are all coming into Eilat. No boat containing cars has docked in Eilat since November of 2023. The Eilat port is essentially out of business. There's nothing going on there. Eilat had two major businesses. It had it had tourism, and it had the port. The port has gone to custard. It's not being used, and the tourism has gone down because people weren't going anywhere in Israel because of the war, and Eilat was suffering greatly. Because of the Houthis, there's been a great siege laid on Eilat. Boats are unwilling to go past what's called Bab el Mandeb, which is the mouth of the Red Sea, which goes right next to Asana or Judea in Yemen. What they're doing now is they're going around the Horn of Africa, up through the Straits of Gibraltar. Now, not only is this problematic for Israel, because it adds 3 weeks to any shipment coming from places like China, Singapore, Korea, and Japan, but it also adds to the amount of insurance that these boats have to pay because they are potentially under fire by the Houthis. But there's another problem. You know who else is suffering? The Egyptians are suffering. The Egyptians are suffering because they own and operate the Suez Canal. And if boats aren't coming up, or they are, but precious few are coming up now, no one's going to Europe, no one's going to Israel through Bab el Mandeb. The only ones that are coming up are boats that are essentially going to Egypt. Maybe there are a couple of outliers. So their Suez Canal, which was a great source of income for them, is now essentially shut down. Now, here's the cool thing. I just found out about this last week. Not only is Egypt not making money on the Suez Canal, but because there are so few ships coming through, Egypt has essentially opened the locks of the Suez Canal, so it's one direct waterway from the Red Sea to the Med Sea. Turns out that a lot of tropical fish in the Red Sea have decided to look what's going on in the Med. And there are fish that have come into the Med that do not belong there. There's something called the lionfish. It's a beautiful fish. You see it in Eilat, be careful of it. Thousands and thousands of lionfish have made their way through the Suez Canal and are now off the shores of Israel in the Med. And until about a week ago, it was forbidden to spear these things. Now there is a call by the Society for the Prevention of Nature and by the Ministry of the Environment that anybody who sees these things should go out and kill them. It's completely changing the balance of nature. These Houthi guys that are firing off rockets and shooting at boats, completely unexpected things have been happening.
So the story that we were told in terms of the Houthis, unlike, let's say, other enemies, we didn't have the intelligence that we know, they're storing this in this place, they're storing that in that place. Where can you strike them? What are you hearing in terms of our intelligence capabilities today relative, let's say, to 15 months ago, in terms of being able to stop the Houthis, whether it's the United States, whether it's Israel, whether it's a coalition, to somehow be able to stop them, to, so to speak, prevent them from having that kind of threat that they have, as you said, by the Straits of Yemen, known in Arabic as Bab al-Mandab?
So the answer is we've sort of proven it to ourselves. We have had about 3 strikes on Yemen. Each one was larger than the one that preceded it. We took out strategic assets. We took out their port. We took out their oil supply. And they continued to fire at us. They never fired at us in salvos. So every time they fire off a rocket once every 2 or 3 days, fire off a missile once every 2 or 3 days, it was more of a nuisance. I do not believe that whatever intel we have, we will ever be able to completely staunch the flow. And that's all they want. They don't want to fire salvos at us. They just want to remain that thorn in our side. And hence, I've written about this in other places, the answer to staunching the flow from Yemen, the flow of missiles from Yemen, is by staunching the flow at its source. If we want to stop Yemen from firing at us, we have to prevent Yemen from getting any missiles from Iran, getting funding from Iran. Iran is the source. When it came to Hezbollah, we could take care of Hezbollah by ourselves, and we didn't need to go to Iran. Iran was an added benefit that they fired at us and allowed us to fire back at them, because I don't think anybody in Israel had planned on a preemptive strike on Iran. In this case, I think no matter what we fire at the Yemenis, the Houthis, they're not going to stop firing at us. And if that ceasefire, in that fragile ceasefire in Gaza, if and when it breaks, we're going to start receiving rockets again from the Houthis. And the only answer, I believe, to those rockets is by striking at the source.
You have to cut the head off of the octopus.
Correct.
Ari, we're very grateful to you. really for giving us, an assessment and analysis of what the capabilities are, whether it's Iran, whether it's Lebanon, Syria, Western Iraq, Yemen, Gaza. I think that pretty much covers the missile capabilities in terms of what Israel's facing. I don't know what you can share with us. Obviously, much of what you do is very classified. But if you could project into the future, the last time you spoke to us about the pros and cons of the Iron Beam, but if you can share with us, from a technological point of view, what are we looking at, in the next 10 years?
From our enemies, I think we're going to be, they're going to be looking at the success that they've had at what we call low and slow. These are the bad boys that they're firing at us, that are these small suicide drones that were coming in from Lebanon that we had so little success with, because shooting them down was okay. Once we detected them, we would shoot them down. We had the means to do that. The problem was the detection, and they were coming in what's called a radar clutter, low to the ground, up against hills where it's really difficult to see them. They were coming in, they go out to sea, they come into Israel, and then they come back in from the sea, and then they fly overland in Israel. And once they flew overland in Israel, it was really difficult for us to see, because we're not looking for threats that are coming from within Israel. We're looking for threats that are coming from the other side of the border. And so all of our sensors and radars and whatnot are all looking outwards. Once the bad boy made it into Israel, and he did that regularly, we had difficulty finding him. And so our biggest problem is going to be, our biggest challenge, because we're going to do it, is going to be able to increase the kind of detection capabilities that we have, not only for weapons that are coming into Israel, but for weapons that have successfully made it into Israel, that are now flying around Israel, that you would have an attack, a suicide drone would come in, and they detected it, just came in over Nahariya. Everybody in Nahariya going to bomb shelters. Now, you can come out now because it's gone down to Akko. Everybody into Akko, in Akko went to a bomb shelter. You can come out, it's gone now to Haifa, and you would watch and listen on the radio as this one killer drone that was carrying 10 pounds of TNT was going down the coast, and people were tracking it. Now, why aren't you shooting it down? Because we couldn't see it. We had an idea where it was, couldn't see it. And this is something that will be addressed. That's one of the key issues that needs to be addressed. Detection, understanding what's going on above our heads. Mm-hmm. By the way, Steve, one thing that you didn't mention was Judea and Samaria. One thing we have to prevent, and we have discovered rudimentary rocket production facilities. Just because it happened in Gaza does not mean that it's not going to happen in places like Jenin and Shechem. We need soldiers. The reason that it hasn't happened until now in Jenin and Shechem is because we have soldiers that are in and around that area. We have boots on the ground. We need to prevent anybody in northern Samaria specifically from building rockets. They have already built a number. They've been on the internet. We found them. One of them was launched a couple of months ago. It landed harmlessly. We have to prevent that same threat from Gaza from coming from our own the center of the country. Otherwise, that will threaten places like Ben Gurion Airport. And if Ben Gurion Airport is shut down, then our economy goes to custard. You have to be very, very fastidious to make sure that we take down any kind of production facilities, prevent them from going up, and because once the facilities are up, then the rockets start coming out.
And
that's definitely on our radar.
There's a lot of problems coming out of Tulkarem. I know they're working there.
Yep.
As you said, Shechem, Jenin, Ramallah.
So these are places we need to keep our eyes on. Things aren't getting better. We're getting a handle on things, but we live in a very bad neighborhood. That's become exquisitely evident over the last 500 days.
Last question. You have a situation where Israel has announced that it's going to try to produce as much internally. The tragedy of what happened during this war is you had many countries not providing spare parts, you had other countries not providing missiles, not providing bombs that were necessary for Israel to fight against Iran and its 7 or 8 proxies. to change a whole structure, forgetting the financial cost of such a thing, but to change a structure like that, could you describe to us a timeline?
Oh my gosh. That's really, really good question and a difficult question, because there's a lot that we make in other countries because it's prudent to do so, either from a financial perspective or from a political perspective. And much of what we make is made in the U.S. Even systems that are Israeli precision guided systems. Some of the components we produce in other countries, such as the U.S. And then if there's ever an arms embargo, getting these things back to us, our own systems that were produced by companies that are owned by Israel, having them back in it, getting them back to Israel, that is proven in certain cases to be very, very difficult. Relocating everything here, I don't think is an option. Relocating, increasing vastly our production capabilities, that is a must. Especially with, believe it or not, one of the most important weapons that we had sort of forgotten about was the artillery shell. It goes boom, it goes up, it goes down, and it explodes. There's only one place in Israel that really makes that stuff, and it turned out we found ourselves grossly unprepared to use these things. And we could use it in Gaza, we could use it in Lebanon, because as soon as we took an area and kicked all of the civilians out, that area became a kill zone, and that enabled us to use much more inexpensive weaponry that wasn't necessarily guided. And we found ourselves grossly unprepared. To rebuild our, to increase the capacity that we need. It really depends on the system. Some systems we can do it within a year. Some systems will take significantly longer than that. But that is definitely the direction that the Israeli government is taking. And obviously it's going to cost so much money. That's okay, because things here are inexpensive to begin with.
Yeah. Ari, we're very grateful to you, really, for giving us, a context, for giving us a sense of what's happening in the various countries, what the challenges are looking ahead. We're very appreciative, and you always explain it in a clear, concise way. I want to wish you and your family only success.
Amen.
You describe your wife as a gem. On the one hand, she's baking cookies and sending them up to our soldiers who are defending the country from Syria. At the same time, she's got a PhD in the famous Medrash Tanchuma, one of the most seminal works in all of Jewish intellectual literature.
My wife.
So she's a Renaissance woman.
Let me just say one thing before. 100%, and I'm humbled to be married to her. I just want to call out FIDF. I just spent a lot of time, as you mentioned, in the U.S. speaking for FIDF. The more I come into contact with what you do, the more I stand in awe, and the more I tell myself that I will support you no matter how, no matter when, whenever you call, I'll come running. And I hope you know that.
We appreciate it. I can tell you, in terms of the war effort and war campaign, as of today, we've committed about $257 million. We've raised about $186 million of that, so we still have a long way to go in terms of our responsibilities and commitments, whether it is to equipment in terms of medical emergency rescue equipment, whether it's PTSD, whether it's the bereaved families. We've committed almost $28 million, and that's growing. That grows every month. And the PTSD grows every month as well, not to mention there are a myriad of other things that we're committed to. And to those who want to support, really feel free to go to FIDF.org, or if you want to deal with something very specific opportunities, steve.weil, steve.weil at FIDF.org. We're very grateful to anyone who can help, anyone who can support us. And Ari, we're grateful to you. Thank you very much.
It's great for all you do. All the best.
Thank you.